The chandeliers cast a cold, sharp light across the Aurora Medical Gala, hitting every face as if the room expected a performance. 500 guests turned toward the stage, where my father stood, his white coat buttoned with the ease of a man who never questioned his authority. I sat at a back table, tucked between the catering staff and a tall plant. I stayed still the way I'd learned years ago, when disappearing felt safer than speaking. "And now," my father announced, "let me introduce my family." My mother rose first, wrapped in burgundy silk. A polite wave, a modest smile. Then Leon stepped up, all effortless charm and confident posture, shaking hands like a man who believed the world applauded only for him. His wife Callie followed her dress, catching the light as she positioned herself for the photographers. "And somewhere back there," my father added, peering toward my corner, "is my daughter Marin. She does something with children, babysitting, I think." A few guests chuckled. He continued, "Not exactly a real career, but someone has to watch the little ones while the rest of us save lives." This time the laughter filled the ballroom. It hit harder than I expected, sharper around the edges. My hands stayed folded in my lap, but something settled tightly in my chest, a familiar pressure I had carried since childhood, now pressing against my ribs with new urgency. I could feel my pulse throbbing in my throat. My phone buzzed. Alicia, my banker at Sterling & Co. "Confirmation needed. 36M transfer ready, waiting for your authorization." $36 million. The mortgage that would fund my father's new rehabilitation wing. The project he had pushed for 3 years. A project that required my approval. I discovered the irregularities 6 weeks ago. The application had crossed my desk at Sterling & Co., and I had immediately recused myself from the formal review process. Protocol demanded that much. But curiosity, or perhaps something deeper, had pulled me back to the file during late nights when the office emptied. I had flagged the discrepancies through proper channels, requested a deeper audit, and waited. The audit confirmed every concern. Now, sitting in the back of my father's gala while he mocked my career to 500 of his closest admirers, I made a decision I had been circling for weeks. I typed 2 words, "cancel transfer." Then I slipped the phone back into my purse and looked at my father, still soaking in applause, while something inside me shifted, small but absolute. My name is Marin Hale. I am 32 years old, and until tonight my family believed I was nothing more than a glorified babysitter with no direction and no future. They didn't know I had spent 8 years building early intervention centers from nothing. They didn't know national organizations relied on my assessments to determine which programs actually helped children. They had no idea their prized hospital expansion lived or died by my signature. They were about to learn. A memory rose without warning. I was 10, carrying home a trophy from the regional science fair. My project on early childhood development won first place. I had held that trophy with both arms, certain my father would finally see me. He barely glanced at it. "That's nice. Put it in your room," he said, turning back to Leon's football replay. I stood there long enough for the excitement to fade, then placed the trophy in my closet. It stayed there for years, hidden behind winter coats and forgotten boxes, a golden reminder of the day I understood that achievement meant nothing unless it came in a form my father recognized: medicine, prestige, status. Anything else was noise. So I pursued the work he dismissed. I studied early childhood education. I took 3 jobs to open a storefront intervention center in a rundown strip mall. I sold my car to cover the first month's rent. I spent nights building a curriculum on a used laptop. No one from my family attended the opening. Within a year, I had a wait list. Within 3, I had investors. Within 4, I was consulting for organizations responsible for billions in community funding. My assessments determined whether programs received support or were shut down. I learned how money flowed, how real results looked, and how to spot manipulation beneath pretty reports. I built all of it quietly, silently, without asking for permission or applause, and because my last name could jeopardize any decision involving my father's hospital, I kept that connection hidden. In those rooms, I wasn't Dr. Hale's daughter. I was the analyst who delivered accurate numbers every time. Tonight wasn't revenge. Tonight was accountability. The laughter from the crowd softened as the next speaker took the stage. My parents settled back into their chairs, unaware of the ground shifting beneath them. My brother whispered something to Callie that made her smile. My mother adjusted her necklace the way she always did when she wanted everything to look pleasant and controlled. They had no idea the foundation of their world had already cracked. My phone buzzed again. Alicia. Transfer canceled. Freeze request submitted. Standing by. The lights dimmed slightly as the next presenter walked forward, Evan Pierce from Sterling & Coming. He carried himself with the steady confidence of someone who understood the weight of his words. As he looked across the room, his eyes found mine. A small nod. Nothing theatrical, just acknowledgement that a line had been crossed and the truth was on its way. He stepped up to the microphone. I drew a slow breath and sat straighter in my chair, hidden at the back of the ballroom, yet more visible than I had ever been in my family's eyes. The life I had lived in silence was about to collide with the family who had never believed I could build anything at all. And I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. The chandeliers dimmed to a cooler shade, and the shift in the room felt immediate, like pressure dropping before a storm. Conversations quieted. Forks paused mid-air. My heartbeat was slow and deliberate, as if preparing for impact. On stage, Evan Pierce adjusted the microphone. He wasn't a dramatic man. He didn't raise his voice or try to command attention. He didn't need to. His presence carried the sort of calm authority people listened to without thinking. Behind me, a server bumped a tray, 2 glasses clinking together. The sound made my spine tighten. I wasn't afraid of what was coming, only of what it would open, what it would break, what it would force into the light. At the VIP table, my father leaned forward, still smiling, still believing the night revolved around him. Leon glanced at his phone again, tapping something quickly, probably confirming morning surgeries or replying to messages praising the Hale family. Callie checked her lipstick in a compact mirror. My mother kept her hands folded neatly in her lap, her attention fixed on the stage, as if she could sense something shifting. None of them knew the storm was already here. Evan cleared his throat. Before we continue with tonight's program, Sterling & Co. must address an urgent matter concerning one of our major partnerships. A low wave of murmurs moved through the ballroom. My father's smile tightened. He straightened in his seat, clearly expecting praise another spotlight moment. Our commitment to responsible investment requires strict transparency, Evan continued. Earlier today, our committee identified significant discrepancies in the financial documentation submitted by Aurora Medical Hospital. The room stilled, a silence so tight it hummed. As a result, the $36 million mortgage for the new rehabilitation wing has been frozen pending further review. The sound that followed wasn't a gasp. It was hundreds of bodies shifting at once. Chair scraping, glasses rattling, someone dropped a fork. Conversations erupted in quick, sharp bursts. My father's entire expression collapsed, wiped clean in a single heartbeat. Leon's confident posture crumbled his eyes, darting frantically between the stage and the open file on Evan's podium. Callie quickly snapped her compact shut, her smile gone, replaced by a mask of confusion. Evan continued steadily. This freeze follows protocol for cases involving inconsistent or incomplete records. It is precautionary, not punitive. My father shot to his feet halfway, then sat back down as whispers spread like sparks jumping across dry grass. Then Evan said the words that split the night open. One more note. The discrepancies were flagged by one of our senior analysts, someone whose diligence prevented a potentially serious misuse of community funding. The breath left my lungs. This was not part of the plan. I had asked him explicitly to keep my involvement confidential, to let the process speak for itself, to avoid personalizing the audit. But Evan continued unbothered by the tension pulling the room apart. I understand she was introduced earlier tonight as basically just a babysitter. A ripple of disbelief crossed the crowd. But that title does not match her work. The spotlight swung, straight toward me. Heat washed over my face as hundreds of eyes snapped to the back corner of the ballroom where I stood, where I had always been placed. My palms grew slick. My heart hammered against my ribs. Every instinct I had developed over 32 years screamed at me to shrink, to disappear, to become invisible the way I had trained myself to do. The sudden attention felt like a physical blow, stripping away the careful anonymity I had maintained for years. I felt the collective silent judgment of my father's peers. Maren Hale, Evan said clearly, is one of the most respected educational impact analysts in our network. Her work has shaped funding decisions across multiple states and improved outcomes for thousands of children. A stunned silence dropped. My father stood so abruptly, his chair screeched. "That's impossible," he said loudly. His voice cracked with disbelief and rage. Maren doesn't have the qualifications for that. This must be a mistake, a malicious error." A few guests flinched at the outburst. Evan didn't. "There is no mistake, Dr. Hale." My mother's hands trembled in her lap. Her face had gone pale, as if understanding something she never dared to imagine. Callie lowered her compact slowly. Leon, finally looking away from Evan, stared at me with a profound, terrifying confusion, like he didn't recognize the person he grew up with, or perhaps realizing he never truly knew her. I rose, not because I wanted attention, because the time for hiding was over. "I didn't do anything to embarrass you tonight," I said, keeping my voice even, despite the tremor running through my hands. "I flagged irregularities in the funding documents because it was my job, because transparency matters, because money meant for children should be spent with integrity." My father took a step toward me. "You're doing this to destroy me." "No," I said. "You destroyed your own credibility. You just never expected anyone to notice." A few people gasped quietly. My mother reached out as if trying to stop the moment from becoming real. "Maren, can we speak privately?" "No," I said softly. "I've been private my whole life. Tonight the truth belongs here." My father looked at me with something deeper than anger, fear. The kind of fear that comes when the narrative you've shaped for decades begins to collapse. Around us, the ballroom buzzed, doctors trading looks, donors whispering, the entire event unraveling in real time. For once, I didn't shrink. I didn't lower my eyes. I didn't apologize for existing. A door inside me that had been locked for years finally opened. My phone buzzed. "Evan. Committee convenes at 9 a.m. They want you as a present." I typed back a single word, "understood." Then I walked out the side doors, past the shocked faces, past the man who had dismissed me my entire life, and into the cold night air, steady, clear-headed, unafraid. Behind me, the gala burned to the ground. Morning arrived with a dull gray light pushing through the hotel curtains. I hadn't slept. Every time I closed my eyes, the gala replayed faces turning whispers, spreading my father's shock, the spotlight pinning me in place. By sunrise, I stopped trying to rest and started preparing for the meeting with the banking committee. I reviewed my notes, cross-checked the documents, and ignored the 47 missed calls from my family. A knock sounded at the door. I expected room service. It was Evan, 2 coffees in hand, hair still damp from an early shower. "I figured you hadn't slept," he said simply, handing me 1 cup. "This is the good kind, not the hotel kind." I stepped aside to let him in. "You didn't have to come." "I know." He sat in the armchair, calm in that steady way he had. "But after last night, checking on you felt like the responsible thing." I let out a slow breath. "It was more than I expected." "You held the room," he said. "Most people would have folded." Most people didn't grow up needing to stay composed around my father. Evan paused, studying me with more care than I was used to receiving. "Can I ask something?" "Sure." "Why didn't you ever tell anyone what you actually do? The work, the impact, the scale. Your family had no idea. Half the professional network didn't either." I thought about that. The answer wasn't dramatic. It was tiring. "Because it wouldn't have mattered to them," I said. "My father built one definition of success. If you weren't in that lane, you didn't exist. I stopped trying to get credit and just did the work." "And later," he pressed, "later separating my career from my family protected the integrity of my assessments. If people knew I was his daughter, every decision would be questioned. Evan nodded slowly. So last night forced the two worlds together. Whether I wanted that or not. He drank his coffee. "You're stronger than you think." I didn't respond. Compliments still felt unfamiliar. At 9:30, we headed to Sterling & Co. The elevator ride was silent, but not tense, more like two people saving energy for what mattered. The committee room was cold, clean, and formal. Nothing decorative, nothing distracting. 3 members sat across from me. Their files were open-tabbed and precisely arranged. Margaret Chen, the chair, spoke first. "Ms. Hale, we've reviewed your findings. Before we proceed, I want to be clear. Your family's involvement is irrelevant. This discussion is strictly professional." "That's why I recused myself," I said. "The discrepancies were found through the standard review pipeline." "Walk us through your analysis," she said. For an hour, I explained everything. No dramatics, just clean data. Therapy hours that didn't match state logs. Purchases that doubled market cost. Outcome reports too perfect to be real. Patterns repeating across quarters. By the time I finished, the room was quiet. In a different way, evaluation quiet, not skepticism. Margaret set her notes down. "This is thorough work and deeply concerning." A beat passed. "We're ordering a full audit of Aurora Medical's finances for the past 3 years," she continued. "The freeze remains." Expected. But hearing it aloud still hit hard. "And," she added, "we want you to consult with the audit team. You understand early childhood metrics better than anyone in our network." I met her eyes. "I can do that, but my family will accuse me of bias." "Your record outweighs their accusations." The meeting adjourned. Evan stepped beside me as we left the room. "Well?" he asked. I searched for the word. "Right. That's because you're finally operating with the power you built." My phone buzzed. "Mom, we need to talk. Please come home." I read the message twice, feeling something settle inside me. Not fear, not anticipation, just a quiet readiness. "I guess this day isn't over," I said. "It never is," Evan replied. "Call me if you need backup." I didn't promise I would. But something in his steady presence made the drive ahead feel less daunting. The drive to my parents' house was steady, not dramatic. No storm clouds, no cinematic wind, just a cold, plain afternoon and a street I knew too well. The house looked the same as always, but I wasn't. My mother opened the door before I knocked. She looked drained, like the last 24 hours had stripped away the practiced calm she wore for decades. "Marin," she said softly, "thank you for coming." Inside the house felt smaller, familiar but distant, like it belonged to a past version of me. The same framed photos lined the hallway. Leon's medical school graduation, my father's awards, a family portrait from 15 years ago where everyone smiled except me, my expression carefully neutral, already learning to disappear. We sat in the living room. She wrung her hands once, then stopped as if catching herself. "I didn't know," she said, "about your work, about any of it. I should have. I'm sorry." "I know you didn't," I said. "No one did. I believed what your father said, and that was wrong." I didn't fill the silence for her. She took a breath. "I want to fix things, at least with you." "I don't need you to fix it, Mom," I said quietly. "I just needed someone to see me." Her eyes filled not dramatically, but with the kind of quiet regret people don't perform. "I see you now," she whispered. For the first time, I believed her. She hesitated, then added, "Your father wants to talk to you. He's in his study." Of course he was. I stood. "I'll hear him out, but I'm not apologizing. I'm not asking you to." The study door was closed. I knocked once. "Come in," he said. My father looked smaller without an audience. No white coat, no stage, no applause. Just a man sitting behind a desk, staring at consequences he never imagined would reach him. "I reviewed your work," he said without greeting. "The real work." "And," And I was wrong about you. Completely. The words fell flat, not from insincerity, but from sheer unfamiliarity, like he had never said them to anyone before. He talked about expectations, about control, about shaping a family image until it became a cage. I listened, but I didn't cushion anything for him. When he finished, I said, "Your apology doesn't undo the harm." "I know, but I heard you." He nodded once as if that alone was more than he expected. Before I left, I added, "If you ever call me a babysitter again, we're done. Permanently." A faint, tired smile touched his face. Fair. I stepped into the hallway lighter, not healed, but unstuck. The version of me who used to shrink in this house no longer existed. I walked out into the cold air, keys in hand, spine straight, ready for whatever came next. 2 weeks after the gala, the investigation expanded beyond anything I had anticipated. I was reviewing supplemental documents at Sterling & Co. when the pattern emerged, not gradually, but all at once like a puzzle clicking into focus. The discrepancies at Aurora Medical weren't isolated. They connected to a web of contractors, vendors, and financial intermediaries that stretched across state lines. I sat back in my chair, the weight of the discovery pressing against my chest. Therapy hours that didn't match state logs, equipment purchased at double market cost from unknown vendors, staffing ratios that defied physical capacity, outcome metrics too smooth, too perfect, lacking the messy reality of true human development. It wasn't incompetence. It was systemic. It was a fraud. And my father's signature was on half the documents. The image of my childhood science fair trophy flashed sharply in my mind. The one he'd dismissed told me to put in my room, still hidden behind winter coats, where I'd placed it 22 years ago. He hadn't just ignored my work. He was actively corrupting the resources meant for the very children I was fighting for. I called Evan, told him what I found. "I think we're looking at something bigger than one hospital," I said. "The patterns suggest a network." "You know what this means," he replied quietly. I did. The scale of the investigation was about to explode, and my family would be at the center of it. The next morning, federal investigators arrived at Aurora Medical. Evan called me at 7:14 a.m. "Maren, I need you to know this didn't come from us directly. Your initial flag, combined with what the analysts found immediately after, triggered an automated alert on the federal side." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying this is no longer just a funding freeze. FBI agents are executing a warrant at your parents' house. They're seizing computers, subpoenaing the hospital board." The scale of the crisis hit me like a physical wave. This wasn't about family resentment anymore. This was about criminal activity and potential prison time. My phone buzzed with a text from Leon. "Meet me at the parking garage. Now. Alone." I found him leaning against his car, unshaved, his expensive coat rumpled. The confident surgeon from the gala was gone. In his place stood a frightened man, consumed by consequences he hadn't foreseen. "I didn't know," he said, his voice raw. "I swear I didn't know the extent of it." "What did you sign, Leon?" He ran a shaky hand through his hair. "Everything Dad put in front of me. Outcome reports, contract approvals. He told me it was boilerplate standard hospital administration. Maren, I think I signed things I shouldn't have." His confession was swift, lacking his usual self-justification. For the first time, Leon looked smaller than the brother I grew up chasing, just a scared man, realizing he had been used. "That's negligence at best," I said quietly. "Children's services were compromised. Federal money was misused. I know. I'm going to cooperate. I have to. But Dad is refusing everything. He's talking about character assassination, about how you've always been jealous of the family." I felt something twist in my chest, not surprise, but disappointment. Even now, facing federal charges, my father couldn't acknowledge the truth. A dark SUV pulled up to the curb. A compact woman with short gray hair stepped out flashing a badge. "Ms. Hale," she said, her eyes missing nothing. "I'm Sergeant Donovan, Financial Crimes Unit. We've obtained the analysis you submitted to Sterling & Co. We believe the scope of this investigation extends far beyond a single hospital." She paused, looking directly at me. We need you to come with us." The federal building was exactly as intimidating as it was designed to be, all gray stone and narrow windows, security checkpoints that required multiple forms of identification corridors that seemed to stretch toward infinity. I walked through its maze with Evan at my side, our footsteps echoing against floors that had witnessed countless investigations. Sergeant Donovan led us to a conference room deep within the building, where 2 other investigators waited alongside a court stenographer. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Hale." Donovan gestured to seats across from them. "I want to be clear that you are not a suspect in this investigation. You are here as a witness and potentially as an expert consultant." "I appreciate the clarification. We've reviewed your analysis of the Aurora medical documentation." She slid a thick folder across the table. "Your methodology is impressive. You identified patterns that our own analysts initially missed." I opened the folder to find my original assessment annotated with additional findings. The scope was larger than I had realized, irregularities that extended beyond the therapy services I had flagged touching on construction contracts, equipment purchases, staffing arrangements. "How far does this go?" I asked. "We believe the issues at Aurora Medical may be part of a larger pattern affecting multiple institutions in the region." Donovan leaned forward, her expression grave. "Your father's hospital is not unique. There are indications that similar documentation irregularities exist at several other facilities, all connected by a network of contractors and financial intermediaries." The implications settled like a stone in my chest. This was not just about my family. This was about a system, a pattern, a web of compromised institutions. "What do you need from me?" "Your expertise in impact assessment. You understand how these programs are supposed to function, what legitimate outcomes look like, how funding should flow through the system. That knowledge is invaluable in distinguishing incompetence from deliberate fraud." For the next 3 hours, I walked the investigators through my methodology. I explained how early intervention programs were supposed to operate, what metrics indicated genuine progress versus manufactured results, how financial flows could be traced through legitimate channels versus obscured pathways. They asked detailed questions, took careful notes, occasionally conferred among themselves in technical shorthand. By the time we finished, I was exhausted in a way that went beyond physical fatigue. I had spent years building systems to help children, and now I was using that same expertise to expose people who had corrupted those systems for their own benefit. "Ms. Hale," Donovan said as we prepared to leave, "I want you to understand the significance of what you've contributed today. Your work may help us prevent millions of dollars in future fraud and protect thousands of children from receiving substandard care. That matters." "I hope so." "One more thing." She hesitated, then continued. "We've identified your brother as a person of interest in this investigation. His signature appears on numerous documents that contain irregularities. I want you to be prepared for the possibility that he may face serious legal consequences." I had known this was coming, but hearing it spoken aloud still felt like a blow. Leon, for all his flaws, was still my brother. The child I had grown up with, the teenager who had occasionally defended me against our father's harshest criticisms, the man who had apologized to me just weeks ago. "I understand," I said. "I won't interfere with your investigation." "We didn't think you would." Evan was quiet as we walked back through the security checkpoints, waited until we were outside in the weak winter sunlight before speaking. "That was harder than I expected," he said. "Yes. How are you holding up?" I considered the question. How was I holding up? My family was falling apart around me. My father faced professional ruin. My brother faced potential criminal charges. My mother was caught in the middle of a catastrophe she had spent her life avoiding, and I was the one who had set it all in motion. "I don't know," I admitted. "I keep waiting for guilt to arrive, but it doesn't come. What I feel is mostly relief, like I've been holding my breath for 20 years and I can finally exhale." "That's not surprising. You've been carrying an enormous weight, the weight of being dismissed, overlooked, dismissed again. Setting that down is bound to feel liberating even when the circumstances are complicated." We walked in silence for a block, the city moving around us with its ordinary rhythms, people rushing to meetings, coffee cups in hand, lives unaffected by the drama unfolding in federal conference rooms. "What happens now?" I asked. Now the investigation proceeds. Now lawyers get involved. Now your family decides how to respond to the pressure." Evan paused. "And now you decide what role you want to play going forward." "What do you mean?" "You have options, Marin. You could step back from all of this, let the investigators do their work, let your family deal with the consequences on their own. You've already done more than anyone could expect. Or you could continue to be involved. Help us understand the scope of the problem. Assist in developing better oversight systems to prevent this from happening again." He looked at me directly. "Your expertise is rare. If you wanted to, you could turn this crisis into an opportunity to reshape how community funding works in this entire region." The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. I had spent my career building programs that helped children one family at a time, but what if I could influence the systems that determined how billions of dollars in community funding were allocated and monitored? What if I could prevent fraud before it happened, ensure that resources reached the communities that needed them most? "I'll think about it," I said. "Take your time, but know that whatever you decide, you have people in your corner." When I returned to my hotel room that evening, I found a message from my mother asking me to call. I hesitated, then dialed the number. "Marin?" Her voice sounded older than it had yesterday, worn thin by stress and sleeplessness. "The investigators came to the house today. They had a warrant." "I know. I'm sorry. They took boxes of documents. Your father's files, Leon's computers, financial records going back years." She paused, and I heard her take a shaky breath. "They told us this might be federal, that there could be charges. Mom, I'm not calling to blame you." The interruption was firm, but not angry. "I'm calling because I need you to know something. Whatever happens to this family, whatever consequences come down, I don't hold you responsible. You did what was right. The people who made wrong choices are the ones who should face the results." I felt tears prick at my eyes, unexpected, unwelcome, impossible to suppress. "Thank you," I managed. "I love you, Marin. I should have said that more often over the years. I should have shown it more clearly. But I do. I always have, even when I was too afraid to stand up for you." "I love you too, Mom." We talked for another hour, sharing thoughts and memories that had been locked away for decades. By the time we said goodbye, something had shifted between us, not fully healed, but moving in that direction. I fell asleep that night feeling for the first time in my adult life that I might actually have a family worth salvaging. The audit findings were released 3 weeks after my meeting with federal investigators, and they landed on the medical community like a bomb. The irregularities at Aurora Medical Hospital were worse than anyone had publicly acknowledged. Inflated billing for services never rendered. Equipment purchases at double market value from vendors with suspicious connections. Staff positions that existed only on paper. And at the center of it all, a pattern of documentation that suggested deliberate falsification rather than mere incompetence. My father was suspended from his administrative positions, pending the outcome of the investigation. Leon was placed on administrative leave from his surgical practice. The hospital board convened emergency meetings that stretched through the night. Media vans appeared outside the Hale family home, their cameras recording every coming and going for the evening news. I watched the coverage from my hotel room, feeling like a stranger observing a distant disaster. The family I had grown up in was being dismantled before my eyes, and some part of me still expected to feel grief or guilt or something other than this strange, hollow relief. The calls started coming soon after the news broke. Colleagues expressing shock and support. Professional contacts offering opportunities to discuss my work in interviews and podcasts. Organizations requesting my assistance in reviewing their own documentation to ensure they would not face similar scrutiny. And then there was the call from my father. "Marin." His voice was hoarse, stripped of its usual commanding tone. "I need to see you, please." We met at the hospital chapel of all places, a quiet space where we could speak without being observed by media or colleagues. My father was sitting in the front pew when I arrived, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. He was dressed in clothes that looked expensive but badly rumpled, his face etched with exhaustion and several days' worth of stubble. The confident aura he always wore had been violently stripped away, leaving behind only the frail, terrified core of a man facing ruin. His shoulders curved inward like a man trying to protect himself from blows. "Thank you for coming," he said without looking up. I sat beside him, maintaining a careful distance. "What did you want to say?" I wanted to explain. He finally turned to face me, and I saw that his eyes were red-rimmed, his face lined with exhaustion, and something that might have been shame. Not to excuse what happened, just to explain. "I'm listening." He took a deep breath. "When I started at this hospital 30 years ago, I wanted to change the world. I really did. I had ideas for programs that would transform how we treated children, how we supported families, how we addressed the whole person rather than just the disease. What happened? Reality happened. Budgets, politics, the thousand small compromises that add up to something you never intended." He shook his head slowly. By the time I became department head, I had forgotten what I originally wanted. All I could see was the institution keeping it running, keeping it funded, keeping my position secure. "That doesn't explain the fraud, Dad." "No, it doesn't." He was quiet for a moment. "The truth is, I knew something was wrong with those numbers. I rationalized it. I told myself that the ends, the new wing, the prestige, the foundation's survival justified the means. I didn't know the extent of the criminality, but I knew the reports didn't add up. And I chose not to look too closely because the funding was keeping everything afloat." I felt anger rise in my chest, not the explosive kind, but something colder and more settled. "You chose not to look because looking would have meant admitting the programs you championed weren't working, that the children you claimed to help weren't actually getting the care they needed." "Yes." The admission came out barely above a whisper. "And Leon, did he know?" "Leon did what I told him to do. He trusted me when I said everything was legitimate." My father closed his eyes. "He saw my signature on everything, Marin. He saw my confidence. He assumed I had it handled. He's going to pay a price for my mistakes. That's something I have to live with. It's the worst part." We sat in silence, the chapel's stained glass windows casting colored light across the empty pews. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked finally. "Because you deserve the truth. Because I spent 20 years giving you nothing but dismissal and contempt, and I owe you at least this much honesty." He turned to face me fully. "And because I want you to know that I understand now. What you built, what you accomplished, it's everything I wanted to be and wasn't brave enough to become. That's not an apology. No, the apology is separate." He reached out as if to touch my hand, then thought better of it and pulled back. "I am sorry, Marin, for all of it. For dismissing your work, for humiliating you at the gala, for spending your entire childhood treating you like a disappointment when you were actually the bravest and most honest person in this family." The words landed in a space I had not known was empty, filling something that had ached for longer than I could remember. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said slowly. "What happened, what you let happen, it hurt people. Children who needed help didn't get it because the money was going to fake programs and inflated contracts. I know. But I can try to understand, and maybe eventually that can turn into something else." My father nodded, and for the first time I saw something in his expression that looked like genuine humility. "That's more than I deserve." "Probably." I stood up, gathering my coat. "What are you going to do now?" "Cooperate with the investigation, accept whatever consequences come, and hope that somewhere along the way I can find a way to make amends for the damage I've caused." I left him sitting in the chapel, a diminished figure against the backdrop of stained glass saints and wooden pews. The walk to my car felt longer than it should have, my steps heavy with the weight of everything I had just heard. But somewhere beneath the heaviness, I felt something else, the first stirrings of what might eventually become peace. The federal investigation expanded faster than anyone anticipated. What had begun as an examination of one hospital's financial irregularities metastasized into a region-wide probe involving multiple institutions, dozens of contractors, and a network of financial relationships that stretched across state lines. I found myself at the center of it all, not as a suspect, but as an expert witness, someone whose understanding of how these systems were supposed to function was invaluable in identifying how they had been corrupted. The documents I had preserved during my years of assessment work proved crucial. Emails showing how concerns had been dismissed, comparison charts revealing patterns of inflation across multiple facilities, internal communications that demonstrated awareness of problems at the highest levels. I had saved everything, not because I anticipated this moment, but because I had learned long ago that documentation mattered. That the truth lived in details and timestamps in the paper trail that people forgot they were creating. The lead prosecutor, a woman named Vera Castellan, whose reputation for thoroughness preceded her, met with me weekly to review my analysis. Evan often joined these sessions, providing context about Sterling & Company's internal processes and serving as a bridge between the financial world and the legal one. His steady presence had become something I relied on more than I wanted to admit. "This is remarkable work," Vera said during one of our sessions, flipping through my annotated charts. "You've essentially created a blueprint for how community funding fraud operates. This could influence policy at the federal level." That's what I was hoping for. "There's something else." She set down the documents and looked at me directly. "We've traced the financial irregularities back further than initially suspected. Your father's involvement appears to extend over 15 years. The number hit me like a physical blow. 15 years. I had been building my career, developing my expertise, creating programs that actually helped children, and all that time, my father had been part of a system that drained resources from the communities I was trying to serve. How bad is it? Potentially criminal charges at the federal level. Your brother is cooperating. He's agreed to testify about what he knew and when he knew it, but your father's situation is more complicated. Because he was at the center of it. Because he was one of the architects of it." Vera's expression softened slightly. "I know this is difficult. I want you to understand that nothing you've done has made this worse. The investigation was inevitable once the patterns became visible. Your contribution has been in helping us understand the scope and ensuring that the evidence supports appropriate accountability." That's what I keep telling myself. She reached across the table and briefly touched my hand, a surprisingly human gesture from someone whose professional demeanor rarely cracked. "For what it's worth, I think you've handled this with extraordinary integrity. Lesser people would have tried to protect their family at the expense of the truth. You chose the harder path." "I don't know that I had a choice. Once I saw what was happening, I couldn't unsee it." That's exactly what makes you valuable. That inability to look away from inconvenient truths. She gathered her papers and stood. "We'll need your testimony at the trial. I'll give you as much advance notice as possible." After she left, I sat alone in the conference room, surrounded by the evidence of my family's betrayal of public trust. The charts and documents and emails told a story I had not wanted to believe, a story of good intentions corrupted by opportunity, of principles abandoned for convenience, of children sacrificed on the altar of institutional survival. And I had been part of exposing it all. That evening I visited my mother at the family house. The media attention had faded somewhat, replaced by newer scandals and fresher controversies. But the house still felt besieged, blinds drawn, cars hidden in the garage, a sense of waiting for the next blow to fall. She met me at the door, looking older than her years, her elegance diminished by worry lines and sleepless nights. "The lawyers came again today," she said, as we settled into the living room. "They're trying to negotiate a plea arrangement for your father. They say it's his best option." "What does that mean?" "It means he might avoid prison if he agrees to testify against the others involved. The contractors, the financial intermediaries, the people higher up in the network." She wrapped her hands around a cup of tea that had long gone cold. He doesn't want to do it, says it would destroy whatever reputation he has left. His reputation is already destroyed, Mom. I know, but he's still holding on to the idea that somehow this will all blow over, that people will forget that he can rebuild. She shook her head. I've spent 40 years married to a man who couldn't admit when he was wrong. I don't think he's capable of starting now. I studied my mother's face, seeing for the first time the toll that decades of keeping peace had taken on her. She had smoothed over conflicts, avoided confrontations, maintained surfaces, and underneath, she had been drowning. What do you want, Mom? Not what Dad wants, not what Leon wants. What do you want? The question seemed to startle her. She set down her teacup and stared at me for a long moment. I want to stop being afraid, she said finally. Afraid of your father's moods, afraid of disrupting the family image, afraid of what people will think. I've spent my whole life being afraid and I'm tired of it. Then stop. It's not that simple. It is that simple. It's just not that easy. I leaned forward. You taught me without meaning to that survival sometimes requires making yourself invisible. I learned that lesson too well, but I also learned that there comes a point when invisibility becomes its own kind of death, when the cost of hiding is higher than the cost of being seen. My mother's eyes filled with tears. When did you become so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just someone who finally decided to stop disappearing. We talked late into the night, sharing truths that had been locked away for decades. By the time I left, something had shifted between us, a new understanding perhaps, or simply the recognition that we were both survivors of the same family, wounded in different ways, beginning to heal. The trial preparation consumed the next several months, the urgency mounting as the consequences became public. My father, Dr. Raymond Hale, was filmed by reporters as he was escorted into court, his face a mask of fury. Leon, looking gaunt from weeks of stress, was shadowed by his defense team. And me, the unexpected star of the news cycle, the whistleblower babysitter, exposing the largest healthcare fraud in the region's history. The constant public attention served as a sharp reminder of the cost of my integrity. The family dinner, orchestrated by my mother in a last desperate attempt at peace, was mercifully brief and brutal. You had a choice, Marin, my father accused, his voice tight with loathing. You could have saved this family. I felt the familiar urge to shrink, to apologize, to make myself small the way I had for 32 years. But the woman who had hidden in corners at galas no longer existed. You destroyed it long before I exposed it, I countered, standing to leave. I refused to be complicit in harming children. I walked out of that house knowing I was done with the illusion of family loyalty. My testimony took 3 days of grueling cross-examination. The defense attorneys tried to paint me as a resentful daughter seeking revenge, questioning my qualifications, and using my father's cruel remarks at the gala against me. They suggested I had fabricated evidence, manipulated data, acted out of spite rather than principle. I refused to be drawn into emotion, answering every attack with cold, hard data, letting the documentation speak for itself. But on the second day, something unexpected happened. One of the defense attorneys produced a document I had never seen, an internal memo from Sterling & Combin, suggesting that my initial analysis had contained errors that had been corrected by other analysts before the final report was submitted. Isn't it true, the attorney pressed, that your original findings were flawed, that you made mistakes that others had to fix? My stomach dropped. I hadn't known about the corrections. The collaborative review process at Sterling & Co. meant that multiple analysts touched each report, refining and adjusting as they went. I had always assumed my work was solid, that I had caught everything. I took a breath. I don't know what corrections were made after my initial analysis, I admitted. The review process involves multiple analysts, but the core findings, the patterns of inflation, the discrepancies in service logs, the documentation irregularities, those were accurate. The corrections, if any, would have been refinements, not reversals. The attorney smiled, sensing blood in the water. So you admit you made mistakes? I admit that I'm human, that collaborative analysis improves accuracy, that the final report, the one that triggered this investigation, was the product of multiple experts, not just me. I met his eyes directly. But the fraud was real. The children who didn't receive services were real. The money that disappeared into fake contracts was real. Those facts haven't changed. The courtroom was silent. Vera Castellan, the prosecutor, rose smoothly, her posture radiating controlled confidence. "Objection, Your Honor," she stated. "The defense is misrepresenting the standard operational procedure of collaborative review. Ms. Hale's initial findings were substantially accurate, leading to the audit. Any subsequent internal revisions are irrelevant to the core accusation of fraud perpetrated by the defendants." The judge sustained the objection, but the seed of doubt had been planted in the jury's mind. As I stepped down for the afternoon break, Evan was waiting outside the courtroom doors. His face was a study in controlled fury. "That memo was a cheap shot," he muttered, steering me away from the milling reporters. "They're trying to discredit the source, Marin. That's all it is." That night, I sat alone in my hotel room, replaying the moment. For the first time since the gala, I felt doubt creeping in. Had I been arrogant? Had I assumed too much about my own accuracy? Had my personal feelings about my father colored my analysis in ways I hadn't recognized? Evan called at 10 p.m. "I heard about the memo," he said. "I pulled the records. The corrections were minor formatting issues, a few decimal points. Nothing that changed the substance of your findings." "Why didn't I know about them?" "Because that's how the review process works. Everyone's work gets refined. It doesn't mean your analysis was wrong. It means it was part of a system designed to catch small errors before they become big ones." He paused. "Marin, you didn't make a mistake. You uncovered the truth. The defense is trying to distract from that." "I know. But for a moment in that courtroom, I wondered if they were right, if I had let my feelings about my father cloud my judgment." "Did you?" "I thought about it, really thought about it." "No. I recused myself from the formal review. I flagged the discrepancies through proper channels. I documented everything. If anything, I was harder on the evidence because it involved my family, not easier." "Then trust that. Trust the work you did. Trust the person you've become." The simplicity of his words cut through the doubt like a blade. "Thank you," I said quietly. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's the last day of your testimony. After that, it's out of your hands." I hung up the phone and stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the past months pressing down on me. Tomorrow I would face the courtroom one more time. I would answer their questions, endure their attacks, and let the truth speak for itself. And then I would have to find a way to live with whatever came next. 3 weeks after my testimony concluded, Vera Castellan called with news that shattered whatever fragile equilibrium I had built. "We found something new," she said, her voice tight with controlled urgency. "Something buried deep in the acquisition documents for the Aurora medical expansion." "What kind of something?" "Shell companies, interlocking ownership structures, illegal kickbacks related to land acquisition for the rehabilitation wing, the very project you defunded." I felt the blood drain from my face. "How far does it go?" "This isn't just fraud anymore, Marin. This is racketeering. It implicates state-level officials, not just the hospital board. We're looking at a much bigger case." The implications were staggering. The web was far larger than I had ever imagined. "What does this mean for my father?" "It means the charges against him are likely to increase significantly. It also means that his cooperation, real cooperation, becomes more valuable." She paused. "And it means you may be called to testify again in a different proceeding at a higher level." I sat down heavily, my legs suddenly unable to support my weight. "I need to think," I said. "Take what time you need, but understand that this is moving fast. The investigators want to strike before anyone has a chance to destroy evidence or flee jurisdiction." After she hung up, I sat in silence for a long time, watching the shadows lengthen across my hotel room. The case I had helped build was metastasizing into something beyond my control. What had started as a funding discrepancy at a single hospital was now a federal racketeering investigation with implications that reached into the highest levels of state government. And my family was at the center of it all. Evan arrived an hour later, having heard the news through his own channels. He didn't say anything at first, just sat beside me on the couch and waited. "I don't know what to do," I admitted finally. "Every time I think I've reached the bottom of this, there's another layer underneath." "That's how these things work," he said quietly. "Corruption doesn't exist in isolation. It creates networks, dependencies, shared interests. When you pull one thread, the whole tapestry starts to unravel. And my family is woven into that tapestry." "Yes, but you didn't weave them in. They made their own choices." "Did they?" "My father made choices. But Leon just trusted the wrong person. And my mother spent 40 years trying to hold everything together without ever understanding what she was holding." Evan was quiet for a moment. "You can't save them, Marin. You can only tell the truth and let the consequences fall where they fall." "I know." I took a deep breath. "I just wish the truth didn't cost so much." "It always costs something, but lies cost more. They just take longer to come due." I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time, seeing not just a colleague or an ally, but something more. Someone who had stood beside me through the worst months of my life without ever asking for anything in return. "Why are you still here?" I asked. "You could have walked away a long time ago. This isn't your fight." "Maybe not, but it's yours, and that's enough for me." The simplicity of his answer undid something in my chest, a knot I hadn't realized I'd been holding. For the first time in months, I felt tears slip down my cheeks. He didn't try to fix it. He just sat with me while I cried, his presence steady and undemanding, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, I wasn't alone. The expanded investigation moved with terrifying speed. Within 2 weeks, federal agents had executed warrants at 3 state agencies, 2 contracting firms, and the offices of a state senator whose campaign had received significant donations from entities connected to the Aurora Medical Network. The news coverage was relentless each day, bringing new revelations that pushed my family's role further into the spotlight. My father finally agreed to cooperate not out of conscience, but out of survival. His lawyers convinced him that testifying against the larger network was his only chance to avoid decades in federal prison. The plea arrangement they negotiated would still result in prison time, but far less than he would have faced at trial. Leon's cooperation had already been established, and his lesser role in the scheme meant he faced only probation and community service. His medical license was suspended pending review, but there was a path back to practice if he completed the required remediation. My mother filed for divorce. The news reached me through Leon, who called late one evening with a voice that sounded hollowed out by exhaustion. "She's leaving him," he said. "Filed the papers this morning. Said she's tired of protecting a man who never protected her." I didn't know what to say. Part of me was proud of her, proud that she had finally found the courage to put herself first. Another part grieved for the family we might have been if only the people in it had been different. "How is she?" Scared, relieved, both at once. He paused. "She asked about you. Wanted to know if you'd come see her." "I will." "Marin." He hesitated. "I'm sorry. For everything. For not seeing what Dad was doing. For not standing up for you when we were kids. For all of it." "I know, Leon. Does knowing make it better? Not yet, but maybe someday it will." I visited my mother the following weekend. The house was being prepared for sale, too large, too expensive, too full of memories she no longer wanted to carry. She was staying in a small apartment near the university, a space that felt nothing like the elegant home she had maintained for 40 years. "I should have done this decades ago," she said as we sat together on her modest couch. "But I was afraid of being alone, afraid of what people would think, afraid of losing the life I had built, even if that life was built on sand." "What changed?" "You did." She looked at me with eyes that held both sorrow and pride. "Watching you stand up for what was right, even when it cost you everything, it showed me what courage looks like. I realized I had spent my whole life being comfortable instead of being brave." "It wasn't courage," I said. "It was just, I couldn't look away. Once I saw the truth, I couldn't pretend I hadn't. That's exactly what courage is, seeing clearly and acting accordingly, even when it's terrifying. She reached out and took my hand. I'm proud of you, Marin. I should have said that years ago, but I'm saying it now, and I mean it with everything I have. The words landed in a space that had been empty for so long, I had forgotten it was there. For a moment, I felt like the 10-year-old girl who had carried home a science fair trophy, hoping for recognition that never came. But this time, the recognition was real. The aftermath of the expanded investigation transformed my life in ways I had not anticipated. The story of the babysitter who brought down a medical empire captured the public imagination. Journalists wanted interviews, documentary producers wanted access, publishers wanted book deals. Everyone, it seemed, wanted a piece of the narrative. I declined most requests, accepting only a few opportunities that allowed me to focus on the systemic issues the case had revealed, rather than personal drama. I spoke about the importance of oversight in community funding, the need for transparency in healthcare billing, the vulnerability of programs serving children to exploitation by those who controlled their resources. The attention was overwhelming, but it also opened doors that had previously been closed to me. 2 months after the trial concluded, I received an invitation from the Department of Health and Human Services to consult on new federal guidelines for community funding oversight. The work I had done in exposing the fraud at Aurora Medical and the methodology I had developed over years of assessment work was being recognized at the highest levels. I accepted the position, relocating to Washington for what was supposed to be a 6-month assignment and ended up becoming a permanent role. I was now helping to shape the systems that determined how billions of dollars in community funding were allocated and monitored. The irony was not lost on me. The daughter who had been called a babysitter was now influencing federal policy affecting millions of children. The move to Washington was more than a career change. It was a final, definitive severing from the identity my family had imposed on me. Leaving the familiar architecture of my past for the austere, powerful buildings of the Capitol felt like a physical embodiment of the control I had seized over my own life. My relationship with my family evolved slowly over the following years. My father and I established a fragile peace during his prison sentence, conducting occasional phone calls that gradually shifted from accusation to something approaching mutual understanding. He would never fully accept responsibility for what he had done, but he came to acknowledge that I had acted from genuine conviction rather than malice. He would often ask detailed questions about my work, not to criticize, but to try and genuinely understand the mechanisms he had corrupted. This effort, small as it was, formed the new foundation of our contact. Leon and I grew closer in unexpected ways. Free from our father's shadow for the first time in his life, he began exploring interests he had suppressed for decades, actually pursuing that architecture degree he had once mentioned, designing spaces that promoted healing rather than just treating disease. We discovered that we had more in common than we had ever realized. He called me the day he completed his first design for a community health clinic, his voice brimming with a quiet pride that sounded nothing like the arrogance of the past. It was a tangible step toward accountability and self-discovery. My mother found her own path forward. With my father in prison and the family image she had protected so carefully in ruins, she was finally free to become something other than a mediator and peacekeeper. She started volunteering at a women's shelter, using her organizational skills to help others navigate difficult transitions. We spoke every week, conversations that felt more honest and connected than anything we had shared during my childhood. And Evan remained a constant presence, first as a colleague, then as something more. We built something together slowly, carefully, two people who had learned to be cautious with their trust. By the time I moved to Washington, we had established a relationship that could survive distance, one grounded in mutual respect and shared purpose. I thought often about the girl I had been, the one who had won science fairs without recognition, who had dreamed of helping children while being told she was wasting her potential, who had learned to make herself invisible because visibility brought only pain. She had survived. She had built something meaningful from her survival. And she had finally stepped into a light that belonged to her, regardless of who else chose to look. 5 years after the trial, I stood in the lobby of the Department of Health and Human Services, waiting to deliver the keynote address at a conference on children's mental health funding. The auditorium held 3,000 people, researchers, policymakers, practitioners, advocates. They had come to hear about the new federal framework for early intervention assessment, a system I had helped design and implement. I thought about my father released from prison now and living quietly in a small town where no one knew his history. We had lunch occasionally when my work brought me to that part of the country. He had mellowed in ways I would not have predicted, the arrogance burned away by consequence until something more human remained underneath. He had even apologized eventually in a way that felt genuine rather than strategic. I thought about my mother thriving in her volunteer work, having discovered at 70 a sense of purpose she had never allowed herself to pursue. She had told me recently that losing the life she had built was the best thing that had ever happened to her, a statement that would have seemed impossible 5 years ago. I thought about Leon designing buildings now, instead of performing surgeries, having found in architecture the creative fulfillment that medicine had never provided. He sent me pictures of his projects sometimes, and I displayed them in my office as reminders that people could change when given the chance. I thought about Evan, who had proposed 6 months ago, in the quiet way he did everything. No grand gesture, just a simple question asked over morning coffee. We were planning a wedding for the spring, something small and meaningful, surrounded only by people who had seen us at our worst and loved us anyway. And I thought about the children, all the children whose lives had been touched by the work I had dedicated myself to, the ones whose emotional development had been supported by evidence-based programs, the ones whose families had received resources that actually reached them rather than disappearing into fraudulent billing systems, the ones who would grow up with better tools for navigating a complicated world because someone had believed their well-being was worth measuring and protecting. That morning before leaving the hotel, I had opened the small box I carried with me to every major speaking engagement. Inside, tarnished but intact, sat the science fair trophy I had won at age 10, the one my father had dismissed, the one I had hidden in my closet for 22 years. I had retrieved it from my childhood bedroom during my mother's move, finding it exactly where I had left it buried beneath winter coats and forgotten boxes. Now I carried it as a reminder. Not of the dismissal, but of the woman who had grown strong enough to stand in the light. The conference organizer appeared at my elbow. "Dr. Hale, they're ready for you." I walked to the stage, climbed the steps, and looked out at the sea of faces waiting to hear what I had to say. "Good morning," I began. 5 years ago, I was introduced at a medical gala as nothing more than a babysitter. My father stood on a stage much like this one and told 500 people that I had no real career, no real accomplishments, nothing worth mentioning. A murmur rippled through the audience, those who knew the story, recognizing the reference, those who did not, leaning forward with curiosity. That moment changed my life, not because of the humiliation I had experienced plenty of that before, but because it forced me to ask a question I had been avoiding. Was I going to spend the rest of my life accepting other people's definitions of my value? Or was I going to step into the light and show them who I really was? I paused, letting the question settle into silence. I chose to step into the light, and what I found there was more complicated than I expected. I found fraud and corruption at institutions I had once respected. I found family members who had participated in systems that harmed the children I had dedicated my career to protecting. I found consequences that rippled outward in ways I could not control or predict. But I also found something else. I found colleagues who believed in the work. I found systems that could be reformed when the right pressure was applied. I found thousands of people across this country who cared as deeply as I did about making sure that children received the support they deserved. I looked out at the audience, the researchers who would publish findings that shaped policy, the administrators who would implement programs that touched lives, the advocates who would fight for funding that might otherwise disappear. "The work we do matters," I said. "Every assessment that ensures resources reach the communities that need them.
Every program that helps a child learn to regulate their emotions, communicate their needs, and trust the adults in their lives. Every dollar that flows through transparent systems to organizations that actually deliver what they promise. I was called a babysitter as an insult.
But caring for children, truly caring for them, protecting them, helping them grow into the people they're meant to become is one of the most important things a person can do. It requires skill and dedication and an unwavering commitment to the truth, even when the truth is uncomfortable. So if anyone ever tells you that the work you do is unimportant, that supporting children is somehow less valuable than other pursuits, that expertise in human development is soft or impractical or unworthy of respect, remember this. The person who was dismissed as a babysitter helped expose the largest community funding fraud in this region's history, and now helps set federal policy affecting millions of children. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small trophy I had carried with me that morning, tarnished, dented, but still intact. The child who once hid her science fair trophy in the back of a closet grew up to write the rules for accountability. I set the trophy on the podium where everyone could see it. Our work matters. Our expertise matters. Our commitment to the truth matters. I looked directly at the audience, feeling the weight of everything I had experienced, the pain, the growth, the transformation pressing against my heart. Thank you for caring about children. Thank you for doing this work despite the obstacles. And thank you for being part of a community that believes every child deserves the chance to thrive. The applause began slowly, then built to something overwhelming, 3,000 people rising to their feet, their response washing over me like a wave of acknowledgement I had waited my entire life to receive. But standing there looking out at the sea of faces, I realized something that surprised me. I did not need their applause anymore. I had never done this work for recognition or validation or the approval of people who had once dismissed me. I had done it because it was right, because children deserved advocates who would fight for them, because the truth mattered even when it was painful, because somewhere inside me, the girl who had been overlooked and dismissed had grown into a woman who refused to be silent, and that was enough.